So first, the burden, and I think to understand what he's getting at by the burden of mortality, one has to understand his ontology of living things, his ontology of the organism. And by ontology, he means simply the manner of being. It's a philosophical word. It comes from the Greek word meaning being, and ontology is the study of being. As he puts it in the beginning of the second column on the first page of the essay, which is page 34, ontological inquiry, says, by this we philosophers mean an inquiry into the manner of being characteristic of entities of one kind or another, in our case of the kind called organisms. That is, everything that exists, but the things that exist in different ways, and one may say that their way of existing is their manner of being, and an ontological inquiry into that particular thing would be spelling out and describing that particular thing's manner of being. And what he's interested in, of course, is the manner of being of the organism. Remember, the word organism applies to everything that's alive, from you and me to all the other animals and plants that exist on the earth, and one would imagine anything else that existed off of the earth. And his major statement about the ontology of the organism is to be found there in the second column on page 34. He says, our opening observation is that organisms are entities whose being is their own doing. That is to say, that they exist only in virtue of what they do. So the manner of being of an organism, as opposed to an inanimate object, Jonas will go on to talk about protons and particles and things like that. Is that to be an organism, of course, is to be active. That is, not to be inert, not just sort of sitting there. That is, that to be an organism is to be active, and our activity is our being. That is, the particular manner of being of things like you and me, things that are alive, is our activity, is our doing, in the way that he puts it. So much so that if we stopped doing, we would stop being. Now what would be left behind would be a body, a lifeless body, but it would not be us. Our being is our own doing. He continues, and this in the radical sense that the being they earn from this doing is not a possession they then own in separation from the activity by which it was generated, but is the continuation of that very activity itself, made possible by what it has just performed. So this continuous activity is our being, and what we get out of it, that is, what do we get out of our effort, is more being, or more doing, one might say. That is, our lives are not things that we possess so much as things that we do, and the effort that we put forth in being earns us the right to engage in more effort and nothing else. And so he says at the end of that paragraph, he says, it follows directly that to cease doing it means ceasing to be, and since the requisite doing depends not on themselves alone, but also on the compliance of an environment that can either be granted or denied, the peril of cessation is with the organism from the beginning. Here we have the basic link of life with death, the ground of mortality in its very constitution. And then he goes on to talk in more, less sort of metaphysical terms and more scientific terms, and says, well, what he's really talking about is the process of metabolism. And metabolism is the exchange of matter with our environment in such a way that we transform what is in our environment into what we physically need to live, and then expel things back into the environment as waste products. That's how we live, by metabolizing, and that's very crucial. He says that we are dependent upon an environment that provides us with the right materials in just the right way to continue our activity, and should something go wrong in that environment, we stop. Okay, so just as something can go wrong within the body that makes it stop, something can go wrong in the environment that can make us stop. The absence of oxygen, the absence of nutrition, the absence of water, things like that, or any other number of things. Now, he then contrasts, as I said in the last talk, our manner of being, which is a continual exchange of matter with the environment, with a proton. This is on page 35, and he says, the proton just sort of sits there, and as long as it's made of the same stuff, it's the same proton. Protons are made of stuff. I guess beyond my physics there. That's not true of the organism. Now, what's interesting about the organism is that the organism is continually in a process of change. Let's see. Repeated inspections, if we look at the same organism, would find it to consist less and less of the initial components, more and more of new ones of the same kind that have taken their place, etc., etc. So that this is the basis of what he calls our freedom from matter, from the physical stuff of which we are made. That is, you and I continue to be the same person or the same thing, even though the stuff that we're made of is in a continual process of exchange with the environment in such a way that over a certain period of time we're made of completely different stuff than they were at a previous time. And in that respect, we are free. We are independent of our environments. On the other hand, as he says on page 35 in the top of the second column, though independent of the sameness of this matter, it is dependent on the exchange of it, on its progressing permanently and sufficiently, and there is no freedom in this. Thus the exercise of the freedom which the living thing enjoys is rather a stern necessity, this necessity we call need, which has a place only where existence is unassured and its own continual task. So the organism is in a constant state of need, just breathing, just all the things that need to be set up in such a way that we can continue that activity, that doing that constitutes our being. And it is in this respect that not only is life a continual effort, but life is a continual risk. The risk of things going wrong, the risk of something happening that stops the particular kind of doing that constitutes our being. He characterizes it a little lower in that column as the hovering between being and not being. The not lies always in wait and must be averted ever anew. Life, in other words, carries death within itself. So, you can see with Jonas, death is not something that is completely abstract and something that is, for instance, with Epicurus and even with Nagel, something that is unexperienceable.